I'm good. Who's this?
Isabella.
Hey, yeah.
Okay, I'll let you in.
Good afternoon, everyone. How's everybody doing? Somebody popped up backstage there, but we'll see if they want to come on stage here. There's Marcel. Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started with our Startup on the Blocks program tonight. Our one of our guests is Miss Marcia Schuffman. She's one of our mentors, and she's helping coordinate all of our mentors for our startup program. Hello, Marcia. How are you?
I'm doing great, Lloyd. Thanks for having me here.
All righty. Well, we're glad to have you, and we got an interesting program tonight. We're going to do a little bit about financials, and that's always a tough challenge for a lot of new founders. And I remember when I got started trying to do the startup stuff, when I was pitching, every time I got to the financials, all my energy dropped and all my confidence dropped, and it kind of shows. So we want to help get people on the right track. So Startup on the Blocks is all about, helping, teaching the best practices to founders. And so when they start on their journey or wherever they are on their journey, they can learn the best practices for growing their startup. And so we're all about, resources and leveraging resources to help startups grow. So Marcel, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, Lloyd, I came to the entrepreneurial arena a little later than some of the other mentors that are going to be here. My background is that I worked for a variety of media houses in New York, and every magazine was run as its own business, its own little.
Okay.
So I called on packaged goods clients like Unilever and Nabisco, and those folks worked with large media relationships firms. But throughout my career, I also worked with sort of the Main Street mom and pop small businesses. And for the smaller businesses, frequently I was the one who designed their meeting plan. They would come and they would tell me what their issues are, who they were trying to reach. And if we felt that their customer base needed maybe a deep dive explanation about their product, then I'd direct promotional pieces, creation, design, and also figure out how to get it to who they wanted to receive it to. I mean, the distribution. So, and then sometimes there were unknowns. And if we didn't know something about their clients, then I would call my research department. And they would create a questionnaire, and then we would do an analysis that way. And so we always created any of their media packages based on the information that we could gather about who their clients were or anticipated clients. Now, for larger companies, brand and project management, such as those at Ragu, or the Ragu spaghetti brand, or Lipton's or Hellman's, I learned that the product managers and the brand managers, I liked that they were in charge of everything and understanding who their customers were. So if you were the brand manager, you knew, who was buying your spaghetti sauce. Was there a timeliness to it? Was there a seasonality? Where on the shelf were they most likely to pull your product? Red label more? Did they pull interest better than a blue label? In fact, if you look in the grocery store right now at red and blue labels on cheeses, they pull differently. They just do. But that's testing. And so we can gather facts that way. Anyway, I loved learning from the people that I was selling advertising to at these larger brands, what they were doing and how they understood what was going on with their product. I liked it so much that eventually I went and I got my MBA.
Okay, all right.
And I was one of the oldest persons. In fact, I was the oldest student in my class. So it's never too late to get your advanced degree.
Okay.
And the company that I opened right after that was a chocolate company. And this was very special chocolate. It was higher in the stuff that's supposed to make chocolate healthier for you. So it was in cocoa flavanols. And this was just at the beginning of, why is chocolate better for you than other candies? And so the milk chocolate had the same amount of cocoa flavanols as conventional dark chocolate. And my dark chocolate, of course, had 3 times the amount of cocoa flavanols as conventional dark. And so what happened is Mars was actually coming up with this technology, and they licensed the manufacture of the product to an international chocolate manufacturer called Barry Callebaut. And so this was a very huge lesson for me. I really stepped in a pothole.
Doesn't sound good.
If you don't have control over a product, don't do it. So I had no control over the cost of the product.
Okay.
I had no control over the freshness of the product.
Okay.
And then I learned this really cool concept called ROI.
Yes.
And ROI means return on investment. So if a company were to make this product, this particular cocoa product, they had to make more money on manufacturing this product than on any other product.
Okay, gotcha.
And so they didn't make this product, but a few times every few years.
Gotcha. So it was a really, sounds like a niche market, but you mentioned in your talk there is that you mentioned branding. So for our startups, how important is branding going to be for them?
Okay, so yeah, let's circle back. So my product, actually, I got it into Whole Foods rather quickly. And the way that I did it is I learned a lesson about testing your product. What is your product? What does your package look like? And this is something that I take with me to each and every consultation that I go on.
Okay.
For example, I bought packages and I had a label slapped on them, and we were selling them, and I was selling them at wine stores.
Okay.
It was 3 ounces of chocolate for about $10.
Wow,
It was really, really great chocolate.
Okay.
what happened is when I stepped away and I wasn't selling wine and chocolate together, people wanted to know where they could buy that coffee.
Yeah, the chocolate. Yeah.
Yeah, because the package looked like coffee.
Oh, wow. Okay. I see what you're saying. Okay.
So what happened is I got in the middle of things and I was talking to my prospective customers. I found out that they love the flavor of it. They love the shape of it. There are these little round drops, but they certainly didn't understand my packaging.
Okay.
If I didn't do this testing, I would have had an absolute failure of the product. And so eventually I hired a graphic designer, actually an ad agency, and they crafted a design for the labels, and people totally got it.
Okay, good.
And so that's how I got the distribution with Whole Foods. And then when it came time to order, I had a minimum of $250,000, and I was a little guy and I couldn't do it. So I take these lessons and I apply that to some of our founders right now, whether
Good.
it's the consumer or if it's business to business. So
Yes.
I have a lot of experience with successes and also some failures.
Yes. Okay. So like you mentioned branding and the packaging and stuff like that. So, but yeah, so I think the brand that a startup has is, it can become valuable. So if you do a good job on creating a good brand, it can actually help your business grow.
Absolutely. It can help your business grow. It can help your distribution. And again, if it weren't for that one little glitch, but I've worked with other companies. For example, I'm working with another company that you're familiar with, ShipShape Urban Farms.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And we're heavily into marketing the product.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very interesting because it feeds into the history. Sort of the legend of the product is that we started out as a shipping container. And so that's part of an interesting marketing story too.
Yes. Okay. So you do a little storytelling there. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes. So like, does anybody in the audience have any questions for Marcia? Definitely go ahead and ask them. And if you have some questions later, you're going to hang around, Marcia?
I'm going to hang around.
Okay. And I'm only looking at the stage chat. So let's look in the event chat and see if I don't see anything in the stage chat. So we're going to move on. And so, Marcia, we appreciate you coming and I'm definitely depending on you to keep our mentors in shape and help them get matched up. And so what are you're going to actually get their bios out? I understand you're going to get their bios out to the different startup founders and everything.
Right. I've already sent out bios of Vercel Vance.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Vercel, also Bob Foster, and also Patrick Rooney. And so, okay. Lloyd, what were the two additional mentors?
John Rigsby and Jessica Griffin. And,
okay.
And we have a couple more too, but I'll get with you on those as well.
Okay, great. All right.
Bye. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. All righty. So tonight we're going to kind of key in on there's a big challenge when it comes to startups and you coming up with some new business model and new idea. So the question is, how do you dig down in the finances or the modeling your finances for this new startup? So we'll get started. The first one we'll do is go ahead and share my screen. It's a company called Slidebean, and they have a lot of resources for startups, and so we'll go ahead and get started with those. So let's go here.
This is not clickbait. In this video, we're going to review the full financials of Slidebean for our most important year. The year when we raised our first $250,000, the year when we grew our subscriptions by 800%. As much as we are open and transparent about many things in our business, we can't release detailed financials for our current company stage. But 2015 was a while ago, so we are okay with you digging through our numbers. So I will be linking this spreadsheet in the video description. So we'd like you to pay close attention to how a financial model works, how a startup distributes its expenses, how much money is required to get a company off the ground, and a reality check on the struggles you'll have to endure as you start your first company. So without further ado, here's Startup Financial Model, SlideBean's 2015 financials. So just in case you're new here, I co-founded SlideBean with these guys back in 2013. SlideBean is a pitch deck platform for startups. We have an AI design platform that designs your slides for you, or if you're looking for more advanced human help, we can also get involved with writing the slides for your deck. All right, so we got together and bought the slidebean.com domain on May 2013 and started working on the platform. We held part-time jobs and managed other projects between 2013 and 2014 to be able to pay our bills. In 2014, we got accepted in Startup Chile, an accelerator in Santiago that gave us $35,000 and allowed us to dedicate all of our time to the platform. Later that year, we also went to Dream Adventures, an accelerator in New York City. We leveraged the Dream network heavily to get into investor conversations. The presence in New York City was also crucial towards getting the launch of the platform coverage by the startup press. Finally, we joined 500 startups in the winter of 2014, raised $75,000 from them, and then closed an additional $250,000 from a mix of investors in New York City and San Jose. So our financials at that time were complex and not very well documented. Some of the money came from consulting projects we took, which were unrelated to SlideBean. So it's not necessarily a great example for you. So if you haven't done so, you should look into our founders agreement video to get an idea of how to manage money at such an early stage. But again, by February 2015, we had money in the bank and we could start spending more aggressively. So here's the breakdown. We started the year with $1,178 in subscription, and we closed it with $16,197. We generated a total of $113,535 in revenue and spent over $313,000. And that's the reason why startups raise money, because turning a profit your first year is very hard. Before we dig deeper into the document, let me explain briefly how a startup or really any business financial model works. A financial model is usually split into SG&A, which is selling, general, and administrative expenses, COGS, which is costs of goods sold, revenue, and CapEx, which is capital expenditure. In our case, COGS holds all of our server costs essential to the business. So this includes AWS, as well as any other platform or tool that the SlideBean platform, the app, needs to operate correctly. CapEx, we use mostly for equipment, so office furnishing and computers. When you buy a company laptop, you're not spending the money, but put it into an asset. So for financial purposes, this works somewhat differently. There's depreciation and a few other things that get calculated here. Now, SG&A has all of the other expenses. That includes the team, the marketing costs, rent, insurance, and services the organization needs to execute its tasks. Finally, the revenue sheet not only has our final revenue metrics for the month, but our financial projections. So we've iterated over many different formulas to calculate our future revenue. As a SaaS business, we can somewhat accurately predict how much renewal revenue we're going to make on a given month based on historical retention rates or churn. For future months, we estimate our revenue based on that and our marketing spend. So we have a formula that estimates the dollars earned in revenue per dollar spent in marketing, including the team, the ads, and so on. If on the SG&A sheet we scale the marketing budget, we see that reflected in the future estimated revenue. This formula assumes, of course, that you can scale your marketing budget with the same efficiency. It would be a bold statement to say that you can, triple your spend on marketing and see that reflected in your revenue proportionally. But you can make small percentual monthly increases while adding a variable to predict that more spent will probably be less efficient, or your cost of acquisition will go higher. Another formula we use is the support staff required depending on the number of customers. So you can estimate that you'll need to hire a new support person for every, 1,000 new active customers on the platform. So as your subscriber base scales based on your predicted increase in your marketing spend, so will your estimated expenses to support that user base. So you can apply a similar formula to server costs and to other platforms and all the stuff in the financial model. Calculating all of this is rather complex, and every business will need a different formula, but estimating this correctly will allow you to spend your budget more efficiently. Knowing what will happen, or being able to estimate it accurately in the next few months lets you choose when and how to scale your team and your growth efforts without endangering the company cash flow. Back to our own financials. We closed $170,000 of funding in February 2015. Thanks to the fact that this was a convertible note, go watch our video on convertible notes, we collected the first $170,000 on February, and then we raised an additional $80,000 in May. Yes, at this point, I had never seen so much money on a bank account that I had access to. Let's start with the SG&A. Payroll or salaries. We spent around $146,000 in payroll that year, which includes wages and payroll taxes. Founder salaries were close to $93,000 for the year. And you can quickly guess that we allocate around $2,500 per month per founder, or around $30,000 a year. Figuring out founder salaries is hard, and negotiating them with your investors is hard as well. The wage of a founder needs to be enough so you don't have to spend time worrying about your salary. It's also important to understand that this should be good enough to get by, but not to save money. Your savings as a founder are the stock that you own in the company, and it increases in value based on the effort you put in. So during this time, we were partially based in Costa Rica, partially based in California, and in New York. We were exiting the 500 Startups Accelerator at this point. So if it works as a reference, the minimum wage in Costa Rica at that time was somewhere around $700. Whenever we had to spend time in expensive cities, we had a small adjustment to cover the extra cost of staying in that city. Now, being by far one of the core, we've been able to attract great talent at a fraction of the cost of hosting those teams in the US. They are not an outsourced or a remote team, but they're fully embedded in our company culture thanks to the fact that we have a local office there. It was only until late 2015 when we were able to scale our organization. Our logic behind this was that we wanted to prove our ability to scale user base, and we did. Once we projected good revenue for the month to come, we allowed ourselves to hire new team members. If you look at the financial model doc, you'll also find team members that made more money than me, and that's totally fine at this stage. You, the founder, are betting it all on this company to grow, and you have the upside to be a majority shareholder. If you want to attract talented people, you're going to have to pay them market salaries. The marketing expenses. We spent around $83,000 in marketing, plus an additional $4,000 on platforms or related to marketing. We separate those tools from the services we use in order to calculate a full cost of acquisition for the month. While we track the effectiveness of each campaign, it's essential to know the average cost of a lead and a customer, taking into account everything from the cost of the ads, team executing the ads, to the tools they use to work. For other SG&A costs, there's not a lot to add. You'll find pretty standard business expenses. You'll see some legal costs on the model, mostly related to the documents needed to close the round. Equipment is another highlight worth mentioning, I think. For us founders, we eventually had to upgrade the laptops we were using, and spending $2,500 on a new MacBook Pro was an unjustified company expense at this point, when we could have gotten along with a cheaper version of that laptop. So what we did is the company bought the laptops, but we paid the company back in monthly installments. Now, the cost of goods sold. If you're an e-commerce platform, the cost of the things you sell here. But since we're a software platform, we really only include the server costs, which allow us to calculate a very great margin, or the cost of running the platform versus the revenue we get. This is gross margin, since the platform also needs human beings to operate, to provide support, for example. But you can still include customer team in here. Now, for the revenue sheet, you'll on this sheet, most of them are quite specific to a SaaS business or are used as part of our formula to estimate future revenue. A lot of this data comes from Chart Module or from Barometric. So Excel is mostly a monitoring platform and a future revenue prediction tool. Some points worth mentioning: days in the month. When you're making, $5,000 a day, it really makes a difference if the month has 30 or 31 days, or looking at you, February. Metrics is the 3, 6, and 12 month trends, which are another good term in how things are moving forward, and then to implement those trend projections. All right, so once again, you can download our full 20 financials using the link in the description. As always, if you're one of the platform, you'll get 3 months free on SlideBean on any plan. Finally, a new feature is we're going to be holding weekly live sessions, answering the questions that we're getting through the week. Leave any other questions you have in the comments, and we'll see.
All right. Yeah, that I hope you all got a little out of that video. So, and you should see the link to the spreadsheet below the video here. If not, I'll try to post it in the chat a little later. So, are there any questions on what was talking about? And I think you did a really good job on kind of summarizing, but at least you have the spreadsheet so you can actually take a closer look at it. And the revenue model for your startup makes a big difference, and because you can identify cash flow gaps and all that stuff and plan for it. The next video is from the CFO Y Combinator, and she takes a whole different approach in presenting it, and it's a really good video with a lot of pertinent information that you will end up using on your applications for pitch competitions and accelerator programs. So let me share that, and so you can see that here.
Morning, everybody. Thank you for coming in at 9 o'clock. It's an early start. So as Kevin mentioned, my name is Kirsty Nathu, and I'm the CFO here at Y Combinator. So I've actually helped now 2,000 companies almost as they've come through Y Combinator. So seen a lot of successes and seen a lot of failures. So I'm going to help you just understand some of the big mistakes that we see some of these companies doing based on their cash, based on their money. And so for every business, whether it's a startup or a mom and pop shop, cash is its lifeblood. And if you run out of cash, then the business dies. There's really no going back at that point. And it's actually surprisingly easy to run out of cash. We've seen many startups not realize that they have done that until it's too late to actually be able to turn it around and do something about it. So we're going to talk about these three early stage pitfalls. So this is probably most relevant to you right now. And then we'll talk through another three that as you start to raise money and are starting to think about hiring are some other mistakes that companies make. So we're going to look at what the numbers you should be looking at, how often you should be looking at them, whether your expenses are realistic, and then thinking a little bit more about hiring and looking at responsibilities. All right, so let's move on to the first one. So the first mistake is really not knowing what numbers to look at to make sure that the health of your company is good. And really, there are three things that you should know: your bank balance, the money coming in, and the money going out. And these are not difficult. You don't need anything fancy to be able to do this. This is all information you can get from your online banking or your bank statements. You don't need bookkeepers, you don't need financial software. This is super straightforward, but you would be amazed at how many companies don't look at this. And then using these three numbers, you can then calculate some other things. You can look at burn, you can look at your runway, you can look at growth rate, and you can figure out whether the company is default alive. Okay, let's go through these in order. Your burn is purely money in minus money out. Again, you can get this from your bank statements. It's effectively just the change in bank balance between two dates. Here's an example. Super easy. You have 25K expenses, you have 10K of revenue, so your burn is 15K. If your expenses are a little bit lumpy, some companies, you might have a one-off month where you, I don't know, paid a legal bill or something that's super high. You can do this. You can look at average expenses as well to figure out your burn. And that's often referred to as average burn. So you might look at it over 3 months to kind of get more of an idea. So then once you know your burn, then you can start to look at what your runway is. And what this means is how long do you have until you run out of money? And the way that you calculate that is you look at your existing bank balance, divide it by your average burn, and that gives you a number of months. So here we have 150K in the bank. We've just calculated our burn rate to be 15K. And so we have 10 months of runway. Again, Super straightforward, but you'd be amazed at how many companies or how many founders don't know these numbers for their company. And just a point here that, again, the burn might change over time, but this is a number for you. This is not a number to try to make things look good. This is for you to not lie to yourself. So looking at the burn and going, well, this month it was 15K, but let's just pretend it was 10K. So then that makes it look like that we have 15 months of runway left. All you're doing is lying to yourself. You're still going to run out of money on the same day. It's just making you feel better right now. So it's super important to really be honest with yourself on these. You can also look at your growth rate. And so this is just looking at 2 periods of time. So your is increasing. So in our example here, we have 10K of revenue in July, 12K in August, and so our growth rate is 20%. And just a note for the people that weren't the math whizzes at school, constant growth rate is what's going to give you the J curve in growth of revenue. Because if you have 20% growing each month, as your numbers increase each month, that 20% is a larger number. Okay, and then the final one is whether the company is default alive, or the other side of it is it default dead? So the way you calculate this is if your expenses are constant and your revenue growth that you've just calculated continues, have you got enough cash to reach profitability? And there's a handy little calculator that Trevor Blackwell, who's one of the founders of Y Combinator, created for you to do this. And basically there are 3 things that you can play with. So you can look at your monthly expenses, which is the red line. You can look at your monthly revenue starting point, which is the green point over at the start. And then you can change the gradient of that line to be your growth rate. And it will calculate where you become profitable and how much capital is needed. Now, this example isn't the same numbers as the ones that we've just been working through. So in this example, this is assuming that you will need 150K of money to get to profitability, and it will take you 2 years. And so those are really key things to know, because if you only have 100K of money in your bank account, you know that you've got a problem, and you know that you either need to find a way to increase your revenue growth, or you need to find a way to cut expenses. Because the whole goal here is to be at the point where you can find a path to profitability, because it gives you freedom. Being profitable gives you freedom because you aren't in a position to need to raise money. And kind of like dating, if you don't need to raise money, you appear less desperate. So the investors want to give you money more, so it's easier to raise money. So it's actually really important to have that option. It can sometimes, it can be a switch as well. You don't have to necessarily be profitable right now, but if you know that you could turn off one specific expense or do one specific thing and be profitable, then that's also a great safety net. There's also a really great essay that talks about this in more detail. This was written by Paul Graham, and you can see the link here to where that gives you more information on this. And again, it's the kind of thing that when we're doing office hours with founders, it's one of the first questions we ask, and you'd be amazed how many people don't know the answer. These numbers, super easy to calculate, super straightforward. The next problem is that people go along and they say, okay, I've looked at my runway, I've looked at my revenue, I know all my numbers, and then kind of forget about it. But actually, this needs to happen pretty often. You shouldn't be looking at it every quarter or every month. You should be looking at it at least every week. And if your runway is getting low or things are looking not very consistent, you should be looking at it very often, like sometimes daily. And whenever anyone asks, you should know your numbers. Have a think now. How many of you know how much money is in the company bank account if you already have one? Great. How much of you know your runway? Slightly less numbers, slightly less hands, but that's pretty good. I like it. I'm impressed. Okay, the next one is underrepresenting your expenses. So if you think back to that default alive calculator, that assumes that your expenses are going to remain constant. And actually, in reality, that's probably unlikely. Most startups, their expenses will ramp up over time. And you should understand how that's going to happen. What kind of expenses are going to increase and what are they going to increase to? So some examples of expenses that may change over time is, the first one is undervaluing your own time, particularly in the early days where you're doing everything and you're either paying yourself minimum wage or some very small amount, which, by the way, in California, everybody should be paying themselves minimum wage. And you're also doing things that don't scale in order to acquire users. And that's totally fine, and that's what we recommend that people do. But it can make your customer acquisition costs look lower than really they are. And so you should be aware that over time, as you start to hire people to look into these, that those expenses are going to go up. Hiring people is not just their salary. For every person that you hire, you need to provide them with equipment. You need probably desk space. You need health insurance, probably, depending on where you're based. And so all of these things cost extra money on top of the salary. And so depending on location, a good rule of thumb is that an employee will cost about 25 to 50% more than just their salary. So if they're being paid 100K a year, then your fully loaded cost to the company is going to be somewhere between 125K to 150K. And again, that's super easy to forget about. You think, oh, I'm going to hire an engineer, I'm going to pay them 100K. That means, that's all it's going to cost. But it's amazing how those numbers do add up. So just be aware of those. Finally, assuming paid acquisition costs remain constant is another mistake that we see people make a lot. Whilst it may not seem like this, oftentimes in the early days, it's actually easiest to find your early users because they're the ones that are totally motivated to use the product. And actually over time, it gets harder to find and convert users. And so the cost of doing that goes up. And so again, you should be thinking about that. You should be looking at what your costs are right now and thinking, are they reasonable? What do we think they might go up to? Because if you can look at things in the worst case scenario and you have, in the worst case scenario, you calculate that you have 8 months of revenue, 8 months of runway left, but actually then things are better than that and you end up with 10 months of revenue, then that's bonus, right? You've got a bit longer to figure things out. Runway is not a vanity metric. It's not one of these things that's supposed to make you feel good. It's not one of the things that's supposed to be used to compare yourself against other companies. It's for you to know the health of your company. And so don't ignore this stuff. Don't lie to yourself. Don't try to massage these numbers to feel like it's making yourselves better, because all that's going to happen is you'll run out of money and it'll become a shock. All right, so these ones now are starting to get a little bit more as you raise money, as you're starting to hire people. So it's good to bear in mind right now, but these are probably less relevant to a lot of you for now. Okay, the first one is outsourcing responsibility. And often the CEO will hire a bookkeeper to prepare the finances for a company as they start to get a little bit more complex. And that's a total normal thing to do. We recommend that people do that. It's usually once people raise some money, it's not a good time. It's not a good use of the CEO's time to be doing the books, and the CEO can be doing much more high leverage things. But the thing to bear in mind is that even though the bookkeeper is doing the books and preparing those numbers, the responsibility is still everybody's in the company, particularly the CEO, but all the founders, everybody should know what these numbers are. An external bookkeeper isn't going to know the business like you know the business. Oftentimes the way that they work is that they will get hold of bank statements and they'll see money coming in and they'll see money coming out, and they'll do their best guess about what these things are. And they won't always be right. And you can't really expect them to always be 100% right because they're looking at it from a very removed position. And so it's up to the founders and it's up to the team to look at those reports that the bookkeepers send every month and to make sure that you understand them and to make sure that if anything that comes through that looks strange, you question. It's not necessarily, I think a lot of it is that people are concerned that asking questions will make it look like they don't understand their numbers. But usually what happens is if you don't understand what these numbers are looking like, it's usually because there's been some misunderstanding in the reporting of the numbers. And so if you're like, well, I thought my revenue was going to be a bit higher this month, what's going on? Why is this, why is this number? Then you can actually go in and look and query what's going into that. And, you might find that there has been a mistake made. And this is probably one of the number one things that I get founders coming to me complaining about. They'll come up to me in this total panic and they'll be like, the bookkeeper messed up and they told us all this wrong stuff. And now I have no runway and I don't know what's going on. And actually what happened is the bookkeeper sent them the monthly reports. They were like, tick, done my work. Founders didn't look at the reports, didn't figure out what was going on. And now there isn't enough time left for them to turn the business around, either to get profitable or to raise money to figure things out. And the company dies because it runs out of cash. So super, super important to be on this all the time. Hiring too quickly and scaling the company too quickly it's really easy to do, to hire too quickly, because you're under a lot of pressure to hire people. It feels like it's a really easy, really measurable piece of information. You talk to founders and one of the first questions that they will often ask is, oh, so how many employees are you at right now? And you say, oh, I'm at 25. And you're thinking, oh no, I've only got 10 employees. That means they're, way more successful than I am. And actually that's totally not true. So we already mentioned that hiring employees costs more than just their salary. But you should also be conscious that every hire is actually an investment into the business. And you should be making sure that you're getting a return on that investment. And now, for some types of employees, that's super easy to measure. So, think about a salesperson. If they're not bringing in more sales than is costing the business to hire them, then clearly you're not getting a good return on investment. But then think about a community manager or a support manager. Is much harder to measure that. And that's kind of one of the things that as a CEO, you need to be looking at and you need to be figuring out to make sure that all the people in your company are actually working to make them valuable. And sadly, this is the point where, if people aren't working out, you should be prepared to fire fast. If people aren't pulling their weight, then they need to leave the company. And like I say, it's easy to fall into this trap that the more people you have, the better you're doing. But actually, the best companies do more with less. And so actually, the real way that you should measure yourselves is, what's my ratio of revenue to employees? Because the higher that is, the better you're doing. You're doing more with less. And that's the path to being profitable from an early stage, which then takes the pressure off to the worry about whether the company is going to continue. And it's also easy to feel like you have to kind of compete with all the flashy startups that have raised bunches of money and they're all hiring data scientists right now. And, oh, that means I must need a data scientist, so I better hire a data scientist. Actually don't. Again, the best companies do more with less. And if you can build a really great company with less employees, then that's amazing for everybody involved. And bear in mind, you should be treating this money carefully. It's not a case of just, oh, I need to hire this person, I need to hire that person. Because what the investors who are giving you this money for, they're asking you to do something, basically a miracle. They're asking you to take their money and turn it into 10 or 100 times that amount of money to give back to them. And the way you're going to do that is by being careful with your expenses and making sure that your revenue grows. As a follow-on to that, scaling before you get product market fit is also another dangerous thing that people fall into quite easily. At the point where you're still figuring out what your product is and you're trying to find product market fit, you should be spending as little as possible. And then that will give you the runway to have time to figure out what it is that you should be building. And then, people will be beating down the door to buy your product. More employees will not help you get to product market fit. It will not help you get there faster. It will not help you get there more efficiently. And one of the conversations that I have with founders is something along the lines of, my sales are low because I don't really have enough salespeople. So if I hire another couple of salespeople, then my sales will obviously increase. That doesn't sound like product market fit to me. You know, if you have that, then customers are beating a path to your door, and you know it feels like the wheels are falling off as you're trying to look after all those customers. So just hiring more salespeople isn't necessarily going to be the thing that sets that going. Also, convincing yourself that you need more developers or you need more people to get the thing that gives you the product market fit. Another conversation along this is something like, I need 4 more developers because then I can build feature X, Y, and Z, and then obviously everybody will buy it. But again, if you have product market fit, then even your janky V0 that doesn't have all of these fancy things is solving a big enough problem for everybody that they're willing to pay for it and they love you for it anyway. And then you can start building up on the more features, and then you can start hiring to do that. This is the one that there's no coming back from. The other ones, if you make these mistakes, you can probably solve this, and you can, you know, if you hire too quickly, you can figure that out. If you don't know your numbers, you can learn your numbers. This is the one that is, you know, no going back. So if you let your runway get too low before raising, you're going to have problems raising your money. So the first thing is you should always assume that you will never raise any more money. Always assume that the previous money that you raised will be your last, and that you should be aiming to get to profitability on that money. So again, the conversations that I have with founders where they say, oh, it's fine, my investors are going to put in another $1 million, it'll be totally fine. That's kind of scary if you're relying on your investors to do that, because they don't always. Sometimes they might, but they don't always. So seed stage money is the money that you'll raise often on just an idea. You know, you'll be able to talk to investors about an idea for a product. You've got a hypothesis that you want to be able to check, and they will give you some money. Once you get to Series A and beyond, that becomes much, much harder. You know, you need sustained growth. You need to have more of an idea. You need to have product market fit. This is why it's a lot harder to raise money as you go through the life of the company. And in particular, don't leave it too late, because if you're running out of runway, your leverage goes down as you're trying to raise money. So if you have 6 months of runway, let's say, and you think you're about to go and start raising money, that's pretty scary. It could take 3 months more to actually get an investor to agree to put money in. And as your cash balances are decreasing over those 3 months, you know, you're losing leverage. You can see from here that probably at 6 months, maybe you can just about pull it off. But really, you want to be thinking at 12 months runway, that's the point where you're thinking, okay, maybe I need to think about whether I raise money or whether I'm thinking about getting to profitability. And also, if you get to 6 months and you're unsuccessful in raising money, you really don't have a lot of time to turn this around to get to profitability for the company to succeed. Again, there's a really great essay on our blog that goes into this in more detail. Link down here, so you can read that at your leisure, and hopefully take that on board. Okay, so in conclusion, most companies die because they run out of money. It's super easy not to run out of money just by looking at a certain number of things. Knowing your cash balance and your runway, understanding how your expenses are going to increase, understanding that the ratio of revenue to employees is a better metric than just the number of employees, and having a plan to get to profitability, because you should assume you're not going to raise any more money. All right. Thank you very much. Okay, so a few minutes for questions.
I thought about the way that you're saying it, how that you should try to get profitability on a shoestring if possible. But I read articles which claim that being profitable is actually bad somehow in Silicon Valley, and you should try to raise massive amounts of money and not be profitable and get giant market share and go along those lines. And what do you think of those claims? And that's when you
Yeah. So the question is, how do you balance the two sides of you should do things on a shoestring and be profitable as early as possible versus you should just throw money and get market share as fast as possible? And I think it depends on the stage of the company as well. You know, in the early days, then probably being careful with your money and making sure that you have a plan to get to profitability is a good thing. Just having a plan doesn't mean that you necessarily have to actually be doing it. You know, so an example might be maybe you're plowing all of your revenues back into marketing in some description or other, and knowing that you could actually slow you know, the way to reduce your expenses is to reduce your marketing, which might slow your revenue a little bit, but it would conserve that cash to preserve the runway. It's a balancing act. And you know, I mean, the other thing you have to bear in mind is that obviously the investors want you to spend money super fast. They want you to come back to them cap in hand with, you know, please give us more money. So there are some tensions there, but it's all about just being responsible with it and giving yourself enough time and enough runway to be able to figure it out.
You mentioned the CFO earlier, and I'm just curious, at what stage do you bring a CFO on for a non-fintech company? Do you start with a part-time CFO first and then graduate to a proper CFO full-time?
Okay, so the question is, when do you bring in a CFO? It's surprisingly late, actually. Even probably post-Series A, you probably don't need a full-time CFO at that point. And there's a lot of services that do, you know, consulting CFOs, and we'll do sort of strategy, or, you know, help you to figure out your numbers to raise, to create a deck or whatever for raising money. A full-time CFO is actually pretty late on. Just to bear in mind, though, that the difference between a CFO and a bookkeeper, at least for the US, is that generally the way that this works is the bookkeeper you would have earlier, and they're the people who are just going to get your numbers that are coming through your bank statements into a balance sheet, into an income statement, into the accounting system. So they're providing the reports for that, and then separately to that, you would hire a CPA. An accountant who would prepare the tax returns and file those for you each year. So there's actually two different sets of people. So a bookkeeper you would need earlier, a CPA you need annually to do your tax returns, and then a CFO who's going to sort of oversee that and do more of the building out forecasts, building out budgets and things like that are probably a little bit later on as well. Before that, it's really the founders that should be doing it.
Yeah, my question is regarding reach profitability for those who start. Do you suggest any financial projections tools or any financial amortization tool?
So what? How can you calculate it? I mean, there are tools online. Personally, I think it's actually better to build it yourself, because I think it makes you think about it in your mind. And so usually just doing good old spreadsheets for me works well, but certainly there are other ways that you can do it, and there's a lot of services and a lot of startups. We see a lot of startups applying to us, trying to help to make it easier to see forecasts and things. Okay, maybe one more question, and then we'll move on. Let's go this side.
So we haven't found our product market fit yet. Should we use the financial projections to find right now?
You haven't found product market fit?
We have not found our product market fit yet. Should we provide projections for actions by
Oh, for investors. So are you raising seed stage money? Yeah. Okay. So at the seed stage, so the question is, should you provide forecasts in your deck if you haven't reached product market fit? And the answer is probably no. Certainly at the seed stage, if you're talking to professional investors or experienced investors, they probably aren't really going to look or ask you for that number. They'll ask you for things like, so how big could this get, and what's the total market size, and questions like that. But they're not going to be looking for, here's our monthly growth predictions. Probably if you're being asked those kind of questions from investors and you're raising money at the seed stage, it probably means that those investors are not actually that experienced at investing in early stage companies. So that's a data point for you to decide whether it's a good person to work with. Certainly by the time you get to Series A, however, you should have some plans. But the point of the Series A is that you've got product market fit and that you have more of an idea. I mean, forecasts are always forecasts. You don't know for sure, but yeah. Okay, I think we are up. So thank you very much. I'm doing an AMA on Friday. So if there's questions that I didn't get to, then feel free to drop them in there and I will answer as many as possible of those. Thank you.
Alrighty, I hope everybody enjoyed those couple of presentations. We have a little less than 10 minutes for questions and answers, and I posted a couple of links in the chat for some additional references. So if you got any questions, please type them in the stage chat, and we'll be glad to try to answer them. And I see Jonathan Kurtz from Generator is posted in the chat. And Jonathan, I did post a link for your upcoming the GBeta program. Is you all's type in if you all's accelerator applications are closed. I thought I had the link handy, but I don't, for the Black and Brown, the accelerator. That would be good for the audience to know about. Marcia, did you have any comments on those two presentations? Have you want to share your experience with startups and money? It's definitely a challenge.
I'm sorry, Lloyd, could you please repeat your question?
Yes, have you had any experience with startups running out of money or having trouble with money or not understanding their financials or whatever?
Yeah, I think cash flow is a very big issue for startups, not understanding actually what all costs are initially. I think a lot of people, they kind of play it by ear. They don't do a lot of planning. They don't think it's important. You had made a comment before about the cost of an employee is not just their salary. But
yeah, I think yes, one of the folks did. Yes, that's right. Yes, but I think there are a lot of good resources out there to help people understand, their financials, so that I wasn't even aware of the slide being sample pitch deck out there, but there's like tons of resources out there for your revenue model, and that's and I think the slide being presentation, I think it did a good job on the top level, helping you understand how you categorize your costs. The resource that I use with my startups is called Startup Financial Model, and it's a comprehensive financial model that allows you to address everything, and it prompts you with the questions, but it costs, so I don't tend to like to put that but if you're really in a position where you actually need a really solid one, that's a good one to use.
Well, Lloyd, you had actually mentioned that one of the veterans entrepreneurship classes that you were at. So.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's exactly right, because it was the tool that I used that helped me understand and answer a lot of the questions. Not being a kind of a accounting or a financial person's. Yeah, and I see a note that Jonathan made. He said they had 600 plus apply and 130 investors committed for the application thing that closed last week. So those things are really popular. So I guess I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, I think, about this while we do the startup on the block. So, of course, it's to train, help train founders on the best practices, but it's also, for like networking. So I think we underestimate the value of one-on-one networking and how you come up with ideas talking to people one-on-one. And this platform does a good job. So looks like Natalie has a question. What are reasonable salaries for founders to put in their financial model? That might be a good question to Google, but I'm not sure. But if I were you, I would put the what you actually think you should be getting paid as a founder, but the slide beam thing said you should put a minimum to kind of get by. But a lot of times with these accelerator programs, they don't like you to. Some of them say, yeah, use the money for salaries, and others don't like you to use the money for salaries. But it depends on the one you're doing. But the key thing to answer that question is you need to account for what the founder should be making, because you could be fooling yourself that your startup is making money and it's really not if you don't have those salaries in there.
There was another interesting comment that was made during that discussion in the video beforehand, and it was basically you should be making enough to pay your bills, but not enough to save money.
Oh yeah, I remember that point.
Yeah.
I'm glad you remembered that's yeah.
And then if you figure it out per hour, you may be making minimum wage.
Yeah, but the bottom line is that to be realistic, you have to realize when you're trying your financial model, you're actually it's all about money and how long you're going to last and everything, or what your growth is. But if you're still trying to get product market fit, you can defer your salaries, I guess, but you still need to account for them, to make sure that that you actually have a profitable company.
So, Lloyd, would you suggest for a founder to keep track of the hours that they're working? So
for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Salary now. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. But getting back to the top level reason why we do start up on the blocks is, there is a significant wealth gap between Black Americans and white Americans, and so some studies said that the median wealth for Black families will go right now, I guess it's probably around 26 thousand, the median average family wealth. But with this COVID and all the automations from startups like what we're trying to create here, it's going to automate a lot of people out of a lot of jobs, and so the median wealth for Black families is expected to go to zero, and so one way we can counteract that and also close the gap on the median wealth is teach people how to do these high growth startups, and by doing that, high growth startups, high growth companies, they account for more than 50% of the new jobs that are created, whereas traditional small businesses account for a little more than 20% of the new jobs created, and the traditional large businesses, they account for about a little over 20% of the new jobs. So that's really the reason, is that you have to do something to decrease that wealth gap. So play your role in doing that. And so we appreciate all you all listening tonight. We're out of time, but join us next Thursday night, and we'll keep on helping us learn. Feel free to reach out anytime through the week with your questions or anything you need. Take care. Thanks a million, Marcia.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.